Over the next several hours, Jake introduced Zarneth to more of what made humans human. They left the break room and walked through the ship's corridors, past confused crew members who had been told the emergency was over, but could not understand. Why, Captain Wong had tried to question Jake about his interaction with the alien, but he had simply told her that everything was under control and that formal contact would be established soon. "This is the recreation room," Jake said, opening. A door to reveal a space filled with comfortable chairs, game tables, and wall screens. "This is where people come when they want to relax and have fun." "Fun?" Zarneth repeated the word carefully. "This is another concept my people abandoned long ago. We deemed it inefficient and counterproductive to our mission. That's a shame. Fun is one of the best parts of being alive." Jake walked over to one of the game tables. "Want to learn how to play chess? It's a strategy game that's been around for over 1,000 years on Earth." Zarneth approached the boy with curiosity. The pieces were simple polymer constructs, but she studied them with the same intensity she might have once used to evaluate an entire civilization. "These represent different types of units in a conflict?" "Sort of, but it's not really about conflict. It's about thinking ahead, making choices, trying to understand what your opponent might do next." Jake began setting up the pieces. "The interesting thing about chess is that both players have exactly the same pieces and exactly the same chances to win. Victory comes down to creativity and understanding." They played several games, and Jake was amazed at how quickly Zarneth learned. Her 3,000 years of experience in strategic thinking made her a formidable opponent, but she approached each game with a wonder that seemed to grow stronger with each move. "I am beginning to understand," she said after winning her third consecutive game. "The pleasure does not come from defeating the opponent, but from the process of discovery. Each game teaches me something new about how you think, how you approach problems." "Exactly. And I'm learning about how you think too. You see patterns I miss, but you also sometimes overlook simple solutions because you're thinking too far ahead." Jake reset the board. That's what makes it interesting. After chess, Jake showed her the ship's music library. He started with something simple, a classical piece by Mozart that he thought might translate across species barriers. Zarneth listened with her head tilted, her star-filled eyes growing wider as the music progressed. "This is extraordinary," she whispered. "The mathematical relationships between the sounds create patterns that resonate with neural pathways I did not even know I possess. It is as if the composer understood something fundamental about consciousness itself. Music does that. It reaches parts of us that words can't touch." Jake switched to something more modern, a piece with vocals. This one tells a story about two people who love each other but can't be together. As the song played, Jake watched Zarneth's expression change. She closed her eyes and seemed to absorb not just the sound but the emotion behind it. When it ended, she was quiet for a long time. "The singer experienced pain," she said finally. "But she chose to transform that pain into something beautiful, something that could touch others who had felt similar pain. This is another form of empathy, is it not? Creating art that speaks to shared experiences. That's exactly what it is. Humans have been doing it for as long as we've existed. Cave paintings, songs around campfires, stories passed down through generations. It's how we connect with each other across time and space." "My people once had something similar," Zarneth said softly. "Fragments of memory remain in our oldest archives. We called it the harmony of voices, a way of sharing experiences and emotions directly through psychic resonance. But it was eliminated during our transformation because it was deemed too distracting from our duties." "Show me," Jake said impulsively. "I cannot. The neural pathways required for such communication were deliberately severe in all Kethmari long ago. But you're changing. Your empathy is coming back. Your emotions are stronger. Maybe those pathways are healing too." Zarneth looked at him with surprise. "You would be willing to attempt a psychic connection with me? Such contact could be dangerous? For a human mind, I do not know what effects it might have. I trust you, Jake said simply. And besides, how are we going to know what's possible if we don't try? She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But we must be careful. I will attempt only the lightest of touches, just enough to share a single memory or emotion. She reached out and placed her hands on either side of Jake's head. Her palms were warm against his skin, and he could feel a strange tingling sensation like gentle electricity. At first, nothing happened. Then gradually, he became aware of something else in his mind. Not thoughts exactly, but impressions, images, feelings that were not his own. He saw a vast space filled with swirling colors that had no names in any human language. He felt the weight of millennia, the loneliness of beings who had cut themselves off from all meaningful connection. And underneath it all, he sensed something else. A deep well of creativity and beauty that had been buried but never entirely destroyed. The harmony? Zaraneth whispered, and her voice seemed to come from inside his own mind. I can feel it. Returning, the pathways are damaged but not severed. They are healing. Jake felt tears running down his cheeks, though he was not sure if they were from joy or sorrow. The emotions flowing through the connection were so intense, so pure, that his human mind could barely process them. But there was also something wonderful about it, a sense of complete understanding, of being truly known by another being. The connection lasted only a few seconds before Zaraneth pulled away, but Jake felt as if he had experienced an entire lifetime in that brief moment. She was staring at him with amazement, her form more solid and stable than he had ever seen it. How do you feel? She asked urgently. Did I cause any damage? I feel ... Incredible, Jake said honestly. Like I just touched something bigger than myself. Is that what it was like for your people before? Yes, but magnified 1,000-fold when shared among many minds simultaneously. It was how we created our greatest works, how we understood our place in the universe, how we loved. Her voice was filled with wonder. I had thought it was lost forever, but the connection with you has awakened something that has been dormant for eons. So you could teach other humans to do this? To share thoughts and feelings directly? Perhaps. With time and practice, it might be possible. Though humans would need to develop their psychic potential gradually to avoid overwhelming their neural systems, Jake grinned. This could change everything. Imagine if humans could really understand each other the way you just understood me. No more miscommunication, no more prejudice based on fear or ignorance. It would be a fundamental shift in how your species relates to itself and to others, Zaraneth agreed. But Jake, there is something else. During our connection, I sensed other presences, distant but approaching. My people have detected my location and the anomalous psychic activity. They are coming? How long do we have? Perhaps a day, perhaps less. And when they arrive, they will not be interested in discussion or negotiation. They will view this entire situation as a contamination that must be cleansed. Jake felt a chill of fear, but it was quickly replaced by determination. Then we need to be ready for them. And we need to show them what you've learned here, what you've become. They will not listen. To them, I am already lost. Maybe, but humans have a pretty good track record of changing people's minds when we need to. Zaraneth looked at him with an expression that might have been hope. You truly believe we can make them understand? I believe we have to try. Because what we found here, this connection, this possibility of real understanding between different species, it's too important to let them destroy. The silence stretched between them as Zaraneth considered Jake's question. Her star-filled eyes seemed to dim slightly, and the flickering of her form became more pronounced. Jake could hear the distant sounds of the ship's crew still responding to the emergency alert, but the break room felt isolated from all that chaos. Survived, she said finally. Yes, I believe that is the correct word. We have survived, but we have not truly lived. We exist in isolation, feared and alone, carrying out our duties without question or joy. She looked at her coffee cup, turning it slowly in her hands. I had never considered that there might be a difference. There's a big difference, Jake said. Surviving is just about making it through another day. Living is about making those days mean something. He leaned forward. Tell me about your people before they became evaluators. What were they like originally? I do not know. Our histories from that time are fragmentary at best. We became the Kefmari so long ago that few remember what we were before. The transformation was considered necessary for our role in maintaining galactic order. Transformation? We were remade, Zaraneth explained. Our emotions were dampened, our capacity for attachment reduced, our focus narrowed to the single purpose of evaluation and judgment. It was believed that personal feelings would interfere with our ability to make objective decisions about other species. Jake shook his head. That's terrible. They turned you into machines. Machines do not suffer as I'm suffering now. Perhaps we became something worse than machines. We became beings capable of feeling but trained not to, capable of connection, but forbidden from it. She met his eyes. Until now, I thought this was simply the burden of our responsibility. But speaking with you, I begin to understand that we may have sacrificed the very thing that made us worthy of such responsibility in the first place. What do you mean? How can beings without compassion judge who deserves compassion? How can those who have never known love decide who is worthy of life? We have been making these decisions for millions of years, but perhaps we lost the ability to make them correctly the moment we chose to become emotionless. Jake nodded slowly. On Earth, we have a saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Maybe that's what happened to your people. They got so focused on having the power to make life and death decisions that they forgot why those decisions mattered. But how did your people avoid this trap? Humans have power now, enough to travel between the stars, to build ships like this. 1. Yet you retain your capacity for empathy. We haven't always been good at it, Jake admitted. We've had wars, slavery, genocide. We've done terrible things to each other throughout our history. But we've also had people who stood up and said this is wrong and worked to change things. We've learned from our mistakes, most of the time. And what made them stand up? What gave them the courage to challenge the powerful? Jake thought about it for a moment. I think it was because they could imagine themselves in the other person's place. They could look at someone being hurt and think, that could be me. That could be my family. That could be my friends. Once you can do that, once you can really understand that other people are just as real and important as you are, it becomes impossible to just stand by and let bad things happen. Empathy again, Zaraneth said softly, always comes back to empathy. It's like the foundation everything else is built on. Without it, you might be able to create a powerful civilization, but it won't be a good one. Zaraneth was quiet for a long time, sipping her coffee and watching the lights swirl in the depths of the cup. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I have been thinking about the Mordaki children. There was one in particular, a small female playing with what appeared to be a primitive toy. She was laughing, and the sound was so pure, so full of joy. I found myself wondering what she might have become if she had been allowed to grow up. What do you think she might have become? Perhaps an artist, creating beauty that had never existed before. Perhaps a scientist, unlocking secrets of the universe. Perhaps simply a mother, raising her own children with love and care. Zaraneth's form flickered more rapidly. All that potential, all those possibilities, reduced to nothing in an instant. And for what? To maintain an order that may itself be fundamentally flawed. Jake reached across the table and after a moment's hesitation placed his hand over hers. He expected her skin to feel cold or strange, but it was warm and solid, despite the flickering. You couldn't have known then what you know now. You were doing what you thought was right, based on what you'd been taught. But I could have tried harder. I could have argued more forcefully. I could have refused to participate. And they would have removed you and sent someone else to do it. Someone who might not have had any doubts at all. Jake squeezed her hand gently. The fact that you're questioning it now, the fact that you're changing, that's what matters. You can't change the past, but you can change what happens next. What happens next? She repeated. I am not certain there will be a next. My people monitor all of our actions. They will have detected my extended absence from the evaluation schedule, and they will have noticed the instability in my energy matrix. They will come for me soon. What will they do? At best, they will attempt to repair the damage to my emotional dampening systems. At worst, they will consider me irreparably compromised and terminate me as a threat to the collective. She looked at their joined hands. I had resigned myself to either fate, but now I find myself reluctant to accept them. Why? Because for the first time in 3,000 years, I feel truly alive. This conversation, this connection, this strange human beverage, they are the first things I've experienced that felt real rather than simply necessary. She met his eyes. I do not wish to lose this feeling, Jake smiled. Then don't. There's always another choice, even when it doesn't seem like it. What choice do I have? I cannot return to my people as I am, and I cannot remain here without putting your ship and crew in danger. Maybe you don't have to do either. Maybe there's a third option, such as stay here and help us understand. You know more about the galaxy than any human has ever known. You've seen thousands of civilizations, witnessed countless ways of life. That knowledge could help us avoid the mistakes that other species have made. It could help us be better than we are. Zaraneth stared at him in amazement. You would trust me with such a responsibility? After what I have told you about my people, about what I have done, I would trust you because of what you've told me. Because you feel guilty about the Mordaki. Because you're questioning your orders. Because you're changing. Those are the qualities we need in a teacher, not the ability to destroy civilizations. But I am still Kethmari. I still possess the power to end your entire species with a thought. Yeah, but you won't, because you're not that person anymore. You're becoming something new, something better. Jake finished his coffee and set the cup down. Besides, humans have always been pretty good at making friends with people who could kill us. It's kind of our specialty. Your specialty? Making friends with dangerous things. Dogs were once wolves. Horses were once wild animals that could crush us with their hooves. Fire could burn down our homes, but we learned to control it and use it to keep us warm. We don't see power as something to fear. We see it as something to understand and work with. Zaraneth was quiet for a long moment. You truly believe I could be more than what I was created to be? I know you can. You already are. The break room was small and cramped, with a table that could seat 4 people and a wall-mounted food dispenser that hummed quietly in the corner. Jake guided Zaraneth to one of the chairs, though she seemed to float slightly above the seat rather than actually sitting on it. The emergency lighting had been replaced by normal illumination here, and Jake could see her more clearly now. She was beautiful in a way that made his eyes water if he looked too directly at her. Her skin held that soft blue glow, and her silver hair moved constantly as if stirred by an invisible breeze. The starlight points of light in her eyes shifted and swirled, and Jake had the strange feeling that he was looking into deep space itself. Coffee, Jake said, pressing buttons on the dispenser. How do you take it? Sugar? Cream? I mean, can you even drink human beverages? I do not know, Zaraneth admitted. I have never tried. My people do not require food or drink in the same way other species do. We draw energy directly from the quantum foam that underlies reality. Right, quantum foam? Sure. Jake poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her. Well, there's a first time for everything. Zaraneth picked up the cup with obvious curiosity. Her fingers were long and elegant, but Jake noticed they were still flickering slightly, becoming translucent at the edges. She brought the cup to her lips and took a small sip. Her eyes widened immediately. "This is pleasant," she said with surprise. "It has a complex flavor profile that stimulates multiple sensory pathways simultaneously, and it produces a mild, euphoric effect. That's the caffeine," Jake explained. "Helps you stay alert. Though I guess someone who lives for 3,000 years probably doesn't need help staying awake." "Time is different for my people," Zarneth said, taking another sip. "We experience it more as a river that we can observe from the shore rather than a current that carries us along. But this beverage does create an interesting sensation of focus." Jake settled into his chair and studied her carefully. "So tell me about this flickering thing. When did it start? Recently? Perhaps 50 of your years ago?" She set down the cup and looked at her hands again. "At first, I thought it was merely fatigue from a particularly difficult assignment. We had been tasked with evaluating a species called the Mordaki for potential termination. They were a violent, aggressive people who had begun expanding beyond their home system. What happened? We arrived at their primary world and began a standard evaluation process. Their technology was primitive, their social structures chaotic, their expansion uncontrolled. By all our metrics, they should have been eliminated before they could spread further into the galaxy." Zarneth's voice became quieter, "But I observed them more closely than usual. I watched their cities, their families, their children." Jake waited patiently as she gathered her thoughts. "They were not evil," she continued. "They were simply young. Their violence came from fear and misunderstanding, not malice. Their expansion was driven by curiosity and the need for resources, not conquest. They reminded me of—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Of what?" "Of what my people might have been long ago, before we became what we are now." She looked up at Jake. "I recommended against their termination. I suggested instead that they be given guidance, perhaps a few hundred years to mature as a species. It was the first time in 2 millennia that I had ever made such a recommendation." "That sounds reasonable to me." "It was not reasonable to my people. The Kethmari do not give guidance. We do not nurture other species. We evaluate, we judge, and we act. The Mordaki were terminated despite my objections." Her form flickered more noticeably as she spoke. "Every man, woman, and child across 17 worlds. Reduced to their component atoms in the space of a single day." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. That's horrible." "Yes, it was." And that was when the flickering began. Zarneth held up her hand, watching as her fingers phased in and out of existence. "I believe it is connected to what you might call guilt, though my people have no word for such a concept. The knowledge that I could have prevented their deaths, that I should have argued more forcefully, that I should have found a way to make my people understand. And it's been getting worse, much worse. Each assignment since then has been more difficult. I find myself questioning decisions that should be automatic, hesitating when action is required, seeing individuals instead of statistics." She met Jake's eyes. "I am becoming unsuitable for my role as a Kethmari evaluator. Soon, my people will notice, and I will face consequences that I prefer not to contemplate." Jake leaned back in his chair. "Maybe the problem isn't that you're becoming unsuitable. Maybe the problem is that you're becoming more human." "Human?" Zarneth looked puzzled. "I am not human. I am Kethmari. I don't mean biologically. I mean in the way you think about things. You're developing what we call empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It's one of the things that makes humans human. This empathy," she said slowly, "is it common among your people?" "Pretty much universal. It's how we survived as a species, back when. We were just primitive hunters on Earth. We had to work together, take care of each other, understand what others were feeling and thinking. The people who couldn't do that didn't survive long enough to have kids." Zarneth was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. "And this empathy, it causes you to feel pain when others suffer." Yeah, sometimes. It's not always comfortable. But it's what makes us want to help each other, to build things together, instead of just tearing them down. Jake paused. Is that what's happening to you? You're starting to feel what other people feel? Yes, I believe so. When I observed the Mordaki children playing in their cities, I felt something I had never experienced before. A desire to protect them, to ensure their happiness continued. And when they were terminated, I felt... She struggled with the words. I felt as if part of myself had been destroyed along with them. That's grief, Jake said gently. It's what happens when you lose someone you care about. But I did not know them personally. They were simply another species under evaluation. You don't have to know someone personally to care about them. That's the whole point of empathy. You can care about people you've never met, just because they're people. Zarneth stared at him with those star-filled eyes. Your species does this naturally? You feel concern for beings you have never encountered? All the time. It's why we have charities, why we send aid to disaster areas, why we try to explore space peacefully instead of just conquering everything we find. Jake smiled. It's also why I offered you coffee instead of running away screaming. You saw a being of immense power who had just told you she destroys civilizations, and your first instinct was to offer assistance. You look lonely, Jake said simply, and you were hurt. Those are the only things that mattered. Zarneth's form flickered more rapidly now, but Jake had the impression it was not from instability, but from some kind of internal struggle. I have spent 3,000 years believing that power was the only thing that mattered. That's strength. Determined worth, that the strong had the right to judge the weak. But you suggest that caring for others is more important than power. I'm not suggesting it. I'm stating it as fact. Power without compassion is just destruction. Compassion without. Power is just hope, but power with compassion? That's how you build something that lasts. Something that lasts, she repeated quietly. The Kefmari have lasted for millions of years. Have you? Or have you just survived? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. The alien woman stared at Jake for what felt like an eternity. Her star-filled eyes seemed to search his face for something she could not find. The portal behind her pulsed with that strange energy, and the thrumming sound continued to vibrate through the ship's hull. Jake could hear distant shouts and the sound of running feet as the crew continued their evacuation procedures. You ask if I am hurt, she said slowly, as if testing each word. No being has ever asked me such a question before. They scream. They flee, they prepare weapons, they kneel in worship, but they never ask if I am hurt. She moved closer, and Jake noticed that her feet barely touched the deck. Where she stepped, small ripples of distorted space spread outward like rings on a pond. Jake shifted his weight but did not back away. The rational part of his mind was screaming at him to run, but something about her manner kept him rooted in place. She seemed more puzzled than threatening, despite the obvious power radiating from her form. Well, are you? Jake asked again. You keep flickering around the edges like a bad hologram. That doesn't look normal, even for... He paused, realizing he had no idea what she was. For one of the Kefmari, she finished. That is what I am. My name is Zarneth, and I am indeed injured, though not in any way your kind would understand. She raised one hand, and Jake could see that it was not quite solid. Parts of her fingers seemed to phase in and out of existence, becoming translucent before solidifying again. Kefmari, Jake repeated, trying to pronounce it correctly. Never heard of your people before. Are you from around here? This part of space, I mean. Zarneth's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. From around here? Human, my people have traveled the stars since before your world had complex life. We have visited 10,000 civilizations, witnessed the birth and death of countless species. There is no corner of this galaxy that does not know the name Kefmari. Okay, well, I'm just a maintenance guy, Jake said with a shrug. I fix broken things. I don't really keep up with galactic politics or whatever. So why don't you tell me about your people? And maybe we can figure out what's wrong with your flickering problem. Zaraneth tilted her head again, and Jake was beginning to recognize it as a gesture of confusion. You truly do not know what we are? What we represent? Nope. Should I? The alien woman was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost hesitant. We are the harbingers of the void, the reapers of worlds, the species that brings endings to all things. When the Kefmari appear in a star system, civilizations prepare for their final days. We are the ones who decide which species live and which are reduced to cosmic dust. Jake blinked. That sounds like a pretty heavy job. Must be stressful. Stressful? Zaraneth's voice rose slightly. Human, I have just told you that my people destroy entire civilizations. We possess the power to unravel matter at the molecular level, to bend space and time to our will, to reach into the minds of beings across vast distances and drive them to madness. We are feared by every thinking species in the galaxy. And you think it sounds stressful? Well, yeah, Jake said reasonably. I mean, nobody wants to be the bad guy all the time. That's got to weigh on you after a while. He looked more closely at her flickering form. Is that what's causing your problem? Some kind of stress reaction? Zaraneth stared at him in complete silence. The portal behind her pulsed once, twice, and then began to fade. As it disappeared, the thrumming sound grew quieter, though it did not go away entirely. Jake could still hear the alarms echoing through the ship, but they seemed more distant now. You are the strangest being I have ever encountered, she said finally. And I have met representatives of thousands of species. They all react the same way when they learn what I am. Terror, worship, hatred, despair. Never has anyone suggested that being feared might be difficult for me. Is it? Jake asked. Difficult, I mean? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked down at her hands, watching them flicker between solid and translucent. Yes, it is. More difficult than you could imagine, Jake nodded. I figured. Look, I know this might sound weird, but would you like some coffee? There's a break room just down the hall. We could sit down and talk about this properly. And maybe you could tell me more about what's causing your flickering problem. Coffee? Zaraneth repeated the word as if it were foreign to her. It's a drink. Helps you think. Well, it helps me think anyway. I was about to take a break when you showed up. You wish to sit and drink with me? A being you have just learned destroys civilizations for a living, Jake shrugged. You haven't destroyed anything yet. And you answered my question about being hurt. Seems like you're probably okay to have coffee with. The alien woman looked around the corridor, taking in the emergency lighting and the abandoned equipment. Your people are fleeing from me. They prepare their weapons and ready their escape vessels. Yet you offer me a beverage. They're probably just scared because they don't know what's going on. I mean, mysterious portals and strange energy readings would freak anyone out, but you seem reasonable enough. Reasonable, Zaraneth murmured. Another word that has never been applied to my kind. She looked back at Jake. Very well, human. I will accept your offer of coffee. But first, I should warn you, my presence here may have consequences for your ship and your crew. My people do not approve of unauthorized contact with lesser with other species. Lesser species? Jake raised an eyebrow. I apologize. That is how we have always categorized non-Kefmari beings. It is not meant as an insult, merely a classification based on technological and psychic development. Right. Well, how about we skip the classifications for now and just go with people? Your people. We're people. Everyone's people. Zaraneth stared at him again with that look of complete bewilderment. You are unlike anything I have ever encountered, she said. In 3,000 years of existence, I have never met a being who could look at me and see simply another person. 3,000 years? Jake whistled softly. That's a long time to be carrying around all that heavy responsibility. No wonder you're stressed out. Come on, let's get that coffee. He started, walking toward the break room, and after a moment's hesitation, Zaranev followed. Her footsteps made no sound on the deck, and small distortions in the air continued to ripple around her. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows as they moved, and Jake could hear the distant sounds of the crew still responding to the alert. Tell. Zaranev said as they walked. What is your name, human? And what is your role aboard this vessel? Jake Martinez. I'm a maintenance engineer. I fix things that break. He glanced at her flickering form. Maybe I can fix your problem too, once I understand what's causing it. You would attempt to repair a Kefmari energy matrix? There was genuine curiosity in her voice now. I don't know what that is, but if it's broken, I can probably figure out how to fix it. That's what I do. Zaranev stopped walking. Jake Martinez, she said slowly, you may be the most dangerous being I have ever encountered. Dangerous? Me? I'm just a guy with a toolkit. Exactly, she said softly. And that may be more terrifying than any weapon. Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel beneath the ship's main deck. The Starbound was humanity's newest research vessel, but like all ships, it had its problems. Today's issue was a faulty power coupling that kept causing the lights to flicker in Section 7. It was not glamorous work, but Jake took pride in keeping the ship running smoothly. The tunnel was cramped and hot, filled with the constant hum of machinery and the soft glow of indicator lights. Jake had been working alone for 3 hours, carefully checking each connection and replacing worn components. He preferred it this way. No distractions, no small talk, just him and the mechanical problems that needed solving. His toolkit clinked softly as he moved, and his flashlight beam danced across the maze of pipes and cables that formed the ship's nervous system dot above him. He could hear the faint sounds of the crew going about their daily routines. Footsteps echoed in the corridors, voices carried through the air vents. And somewhere in the distance, the mess hall's food dispensers hummed their familiar tune. Jake had been part of the Starbound's crew for 2 years now, but he still felt more comfortable down here in the mechanical spaces than up there with the scientists and officers. He was tightening a particularly stubborn bolt when the ship's intercom crackled to life. Captain Lisa Wong's voice echoed through the tunnels, but the words were muffled and distorted by the surrounding machinery. Jake caught fragments, something about sensors and unknown contacts, but he was too focused on his work to pay much attention. The ship's sensors were always picking up space debris or unusual energy readings. It was part of being in unexplored space. The bolt finally gave way, and Jake smiled with satisfaction. He pulled out his scanner and checked the power flow through the coupling. The readings looked good, steady, and strong. He made a note on his tablet and started packing his tools. Just one more connection to check, and he could call it a day. That was when the lights went out. Not just the flickering that had been plaguing Section 7, but everything. The tunnel plunged into complete darkness, and the constant hum of machinery died away to nothing. Jake's flashlight seemed pitifully small in the sudden silence. He had never experienced a complete power failure on the Starbound before. The ship had multiple backup systems and redundancies built into every critical component. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a red glow. Jake could hear alarms blaring somewhere above him, and the intercom crackled again. This time, Captain Wong's voice was clear and urgent. She was ordering all crew to battle stations and preparing for possible evacuation. Jake frowned and started crawling toward the nearest access hatch. Whatever was happening up there, it sounded serious. Before he could reach the hatch, the ship shuddered. It was not the familiar vibration of the engines or the gentle sway of artificial gravity adjustment. This was something else entirely, like the Starbound had been grabbed by an invisible hand and shaken. Jake braced himself against the tunnel walls as loose tools rattled in their compartments. The shaking stopped. As suddenly as it had begun, Jake waited for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ship. The engines were still running, but there was a new noise, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was not mechanical. It was something else, something that made the hair on his arm stand up. Jake reached the access hatch and started to climb up into the main corridor. As he emerged from the tunnel, he could see crew members running past, their faces tight with worry. Some were carrying emergency equipment, others were heading toward the escape pods. The red emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and the thrumming sound was louder here. He was about to ask someone what was happening when the air in front of him began to shimmer. At first, Jake thought it was a problem with his vision, maybe from being in the tunnel too long. But the shimmer grew stronger, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The air itself seemed to be bending and twisting, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. Jake stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for his toolkit. Whatever was happening, it was not normal. The shimmer expanded, creating an oval of distorted space about 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide. Through it, Jake could see something that made no sense. Stars that were not the stars visible from the Starbound's windows, and a darkness that seemed to move and breathe. The oval stabilized, and Jake realized he was looking at some kind of portal. The thrumming sound was coming from it, growing stronger by the second. He should run. He knew that. He should follow the other crew members to the escape pods and get as far away from this impossible thing as possible. But something held him in place. Curiosity, perhaps, or the engineer's instinct to understand how things worked. A figure stepped through the portal. Jake's first thought was that it was a woman, tall and graceful, moving with fluid steps that barely seemed to touch the deck. But as she emerged fully from the shimmer, he could see that she was not human. Her skin had a faint blue tint and seemed to glow softly from within. Her hair was long and silver, moving as if she were underwater even though there was no breeze. Her eyes were the most striking feature, large and dark, with tiny points of light that looked like distant stars. She wore something that might have been clothing, but it seemed to be made of the same shimmering energy as the portal. It flowed around her like liquid light, never quite settling into a fixed shape. When she moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around her, creating small distortions in the air. The woman, alien, Jake corrected himself, looked around the corridor with those star-filled eyes. She saw the emergency lighting, the abandoned equipment that crew members had dropped in their haste to evacuate. And finally, she saw Jake, her gaze fixed on him, and he felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity building before a thunderstorm. For a long moment, they stared at each other in silence. Jake was aware that he should be terrified. Every instinct told him that this being was dangerous, that her very presence was bending the normal rules of physics. The portal behind her pulsed with energy that made his teeth ache, and the thrumming sound was now so loud he could feel it in his bones. But looking at her face, Jake saw something unexpected. Beneath the alien features and the impossible beauty, he saw loneliness. It was in the way she held herself, the careful distance she maintained from everything around her, the slight tension in her shoulders as if she expected to be attacked. At any moment, the alien woman tilted her head slightly, studying Jake with obvious curiosity. When she spoke, her voice was soft and musical, but the words came from everywhere at once, as if the air itself was speaking. "You do not flee," she sighed, and there was wonder in her tone. "All others flee when they see what I am. Yet you remain. Why?" Jake found his voice after a moment. "I guess I'm curious," he said simply. "Are you hurt?" "You look like you might be hurt." The alien woman's eyes widened, and for just a moment, her perfect composure cracked. Jake could see genuine shock on her face, as if his words were the last thing she had expected to hear.